crap I used.
Checking the mic, 1 2 3. Check the mic, 1 2 3. Check the mic. Check 1 2 3. Check 1 2 3.
Prior to the events that we were addressing today in the courthouse here in Grand Forks in federal court, prior to those events, the defendant in this case had been charged with being a drug dealer by federal court in South Dakota. On August 14th, we have alleged in our charging documents, and the grand jury has indicted this defendant on August 14th of dramatically elevating his state of play beyond being an alleged drug dealer. As you'll see in our federal indictment, the grand jury has returned an indictment including overt acts focusing on the attempted murder of a Grafton police officer. Officer Campaverde is not able to be here today, but I spoke with him yesterday. And we're all pleased, obviously, and we're all fortunate that he is surviving his injuries. So today, the grand jury, we've announced the grand jury's indictment of the defendant, Ruben Cruz, with at this point 3 additional federal counts, 2 involving allegations of his work and conspiracy in drug dealing, and the third one of those in using a firearm, both possessing, brandishing, and using that firearm in furtherance of his drug crime. Under federal law, which I should point out, I want to thank our participants here today, and we're all available for your questions. To my immediate right is the state's attorney from Walsh County, North Dakota. She has been up there for quite some number of years. We were just talking about that, going on 20 years as an assistant state's attorney, and now the state's attorney for Walsh County, State's Attorney Kelly Cole. Back in the far right here is the Chief of Police from Grafton, North Dakota. We won't be talking about the facts of that night, but I can share with you that the Chief responded to these events as well. I've been out to the scene of these alleged occurrences last Friday, and I've seen the proximity of the crime scene to the law enforcement center, and it's quite something. Also responding that night was the sheriff from Walsh County. Sheriff Juergens is back here to my left. Chief of Police Dumas, as I said, State's Attorney Cole. I wanted to point out that from the very beginning, the hours after these occurrences, that I was in contact by phone with my state and county law enforcement partners. It's important for people to recognize that we're working hand in glove on these matters. I appreciate very much the state's attorney showing up today. There are obviously state charges that could be brought to bear in this matter as well. We've worked out in the ensuing days what the appropriate sequence would be, federal charging, and then other matters to be addressed up ahead. Federal law enforcement is working hand in glove with Chief Dumas and with Sheriff Juergens, the North Dakota BCI, and others who are working on this. North Dakota Highway Patrol, a host of other agencies that are working, and we appreciate it very much. It's important, I think, that people see that united front. Where appropriate, and I would tell you that we presented this matter to the grand jury because this is one of those cases where appropriate. Federal law provides what I'll call an elevated, forceful, appropriate set of options in response to escalations of and severity of violence. As I said at the beginning of this, the defendant in this case walked into that day as an alleged drug dealer under an indictment out of South Dakota, my federal counterparts down in South Dakota. And at the end of that day, and now as a result of this federal grand jury indictment, He stands as a twice accused federal drug trafficker and conspirator, and elevated his state of play, his level of play, to the attempted murder of a Grand Forks, North Dakota, a Grafton, North Dakota police officer. You heard, if you were in the hearing, and I know a couple of you were, the potential penalties under federal law. And I point out that those would be in addition to anything that would happen under state law. Just at the foundation point, the allegations of the grand jury today hold, under our federal indictment here, for the drug components of it, mandatory sentences of 10 years. Mandatory sentences of 10 years and up. The alleged violence that the grand jury has said they are alleging accompanied that drug trafficking brings additional minimum of 10 years consecutive. That's before anyone hears the first bit of evidence about Officer Campaverde taking a bullet and the circumstances inside of Grafton, which it was interesting. Chief Dumas told me last Friday when I was in Grafton that it was the first time in Grafton's history that there had been an exchange of gunfire with law enforcement in that community. So before anyone has heard any evidence in addition to that, if and when these allegations become convictions, the defendant is facing in federal court a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. And we're just talking about the federal indictments here in North Dakota. That says nothing of the indictments in South Dakota. With that, we'll take some questions, unless you have some statements you'd like to make beforehand, any of you? Okay.
Can you talk about whether all the officers involved in the shooting of Mr. Cruz have been cleared of any wrongdoing? And can you talk more specifically about the timeline? There's been some suggestion that once Mr. Cruz was already shot, he was shot again.
Yeah, I don't know where you heard a suggestion like that. And I don't know why you would raise a question of any allegations of wrongdoing. I've heard nothing along those lines, nothing in the facts that I've heard about this case, and I'm not aware of any substantial or credible allegations of wrongdoing by anyone. But they're going through their administrative processes, obviously. Federal, state, local law enforcement working together. And those matters will be vetted out up ahead. But have heard no credible allegations of anything along those lines at all. And there are plenty of witnesses out there.
Is the minimum 10 or 20 years?
Well, because maybe I didn't state it correctly. It's 20 because they have to be stacked. The 924C, the firearms charges, the discharge of a firearm, in this instance, the attempted murder, we allege the attempted murder of Officer Campaverde, that has to be stacked on top of, that is consecutive under federal law to any sentence for the drug trafficking crime or any other allegations or other crimes in this case. So you've got the mandatory minimum of 10 years on the drug case, and then if there's a conviction on the firearms component of it, that'd be 10 years consecutive. So it's a mandatory. You're looking at mandatory sentences, if convicted, of a minimum of 20 years on just the North Dakota indictments alone, and that's only on the federal side. It says nothing of the federal indictment out of South Dakota. It says nothing of any state charges that might come down the road in North Dakota.
Was bail set today?
No, they waived even a detention discussion today, and they could have they're entitled to have that within a number of days. I think the judge said it would have been Monday, and they waived that indefinitely. And so it's undetermined whether they're even going to seek to have him released. I think you've got experienced counsel there. They're aware of the factors that go into a release decision. We'll see, but until further notice, that hearing's not set.
Is it common to serve a search warrant at that, or an arrest warrant at that time of day?
Common? Well, I mean, you talk to any of the men and women in law enforcement, they'll tell you, the time of day, unlike the rest of us, the time of day isn't determinant of their work, right? Their work goes on around the clock. And it's, time of day when there's a federal warrant or there's a state warrant for somebody and law enforcement has a beat on their whereabouts, they do the very best they can to make sure that warrant is executed with safety for everyone involved, for the public, safety for law enforcement, obviously, and safety for the people who they're seeking to bring into custody. The allegations in this case, bear out, and I think I'll leave it to the indictment. I don't want to go in too far into the facts that are being alleged from that night. There are overt acts. That's a public document as of now that we've had this hearing. That's been unsealed and will be available for all of your review.
So can you talk about the timeline at all? What happened and who fired when?
No,
and
we're not
all
going to
that?
talk about that right now.
Okay.
But you know, as these court hearings proceed, there's some discussion. But really, the time for all of that becomes if when there's a trial in this matter, and that got scheduled today as well, tentatively scheduled for November 3rd, in front of Judge Welty in federal court. Presumably that would be down in Fargo, and they had some dates also for pretrial motions. It's more typical, maybe especially in the era of COVID-19, that this would be for a little further on down the road. But the investigation continues as to Mr. Cruz and his associates.
So, are you alleging that he was dealing drugs out of that home?
Well, I'm just going to leave it at the allegations in the indictment itself. We allege a certain level of both drug trafficking, and conspiracy with others to traffic in narcotics, and of certain amounts that bring with them a federal mandatory sentence, as I said before, a mandatory minimum of 20 years if convicted in federal court. And on top of that gets stacked, if found guilty, Cruz, on top of that you get stacked the additional minimum of 10 years upside of life, right? 10 years to life in addition to whatever he would get for the drug trafficking convictions if convicted.
Can you say, I know you're not getting into specific details about that night, but is Grafton PD equipped with either body cams or dash cam video that recorded any of the events?
We're not going to talk about any of that tonight. We've talked inside quite a bit about this in the last week and in the days leading up to this, and those are all matters, that obviously there's going to be ultimately complete transparency about. All discoveries being compiled and will be provided to the defense. Discoveries rolling in now. In fact, I got some reports this morning in my office back in Fargo before coming up here. That'll all be coming in, and it all gets provided to the defense in real time. Not at this time, not going to, but I know you saw Mr. Garcia appeared this week in federal court in Fargo, and his indictment is public as well.
So you can't say if he's connected with Cruz?
I'm not going to say whether they're connected. Any other questions?
How you talked about 50 grams. I'm sorry, I'm not a drug dealer, but is that a lot? I mean, was this a major operation that he was?
Well, I mean, ask yourself. The Congress of the United States has determined some while back that amount, it means that if you get convicted of that amount or above, you're going to go to federal prison for a mandatory minimum of 10 years. We're alleging, yes, significant narcotics trafficking and conspiracy to traffic in narcotics in and around the Grafton, Bottineau areas, North Dakota, and also reaching down into South Dakota if you look at their indictment as well, which will be public now. In addition, as a result, his appearance was on that charge today as well.
And again, what's the technical term for the shooting charge? What's the charge?
Well, it's the use of a firearm in furtherance of a drug crime. And I should point out there's 3 different levels, but they're all mandatories. Use a firearm. If you're just carrying that firearm and you're engaged in the business of narcotics trafficking, you're carrying that firearm. It's a 5-year mandatory minimum, consecutive to whatever drug sentence you get. If you brandish it, you pull it out, maybe you're just trying to intimidate somebody, maybe you're showing them, how great your gun is. But if you brandish it and show it, it's an additional 7 years, mandatory, consecutive. And if you discharge, as we allege happened in this case, in the attempted murder of Officer Campaverde, you discharge that weapon, it is a mandatory 10 years consecutive. And I said that's before you get to the point where you explain to the judge what happened as a result of that discharge. And we allege in this instance that Officer Campaverde was struck at least once, but it actually looks more like twice by weapons fired by, we allege, the defendant in this case.
Okay. And the other 2 crimes are drug conspiracy, or the other 2 counts?
One of just dealing narcotics over a certain level, and one of a conspiracy to move narcotics in excess of 500 grams.
Will this case ever go to state court, or do you think it'll most likely stay in federal court?
Well,
given the penalties.
State's Attorney Cole and I, in working that through, you figure out the sequence of that, and those decisions can be made up the road, right? I mean, you look at the sentencing options that are available to us in federal court, and we reached the determination that it would seem best to go sequentially, first coming here to federal court to see what the outcome is, and then it'll go on to the determinations of the state. But there's no way to know. We don't do the sentencing part of this. we do the charging, the allegations. We present it to the grand jury, which was done here. And the grand jury returned a pretty detailed indictment of the defendant for the alleged conduct.
What was that initial statement you made? Sorry, I didn't have about he really upped his game, or what was the initial comment you made about?
Well, he went into the day on August 14th as an alleged drug dealer, alleged under the indictment from federal court in South Dakota. That led to the warrant that was being executed, the arrest warrant being executed by state and county law enforcement here in North Dakota. I really want to compliment and thank Chief Dumas and Sheriff Juergens. I want to thank them and the men and women in uniform up there in Walsh County. They've got plenty of work to do of their own, and they work. They're working on. They've got plenty of they've got warrants. They've got other matters, and their officers, their sheriff's deputies and others, they take it upon themselves to also do the work, carry out work hand in glove with federal law enforcement. And we deeply appreciate that. And as you see this night, as a result, they were in harm's way. And our thanks to them, our gratitude is profound.
What was your reaction? You said you went up and saw the scene. I mean, this house is literally behind the police station. What was your reaction when you initially saw that?
Yeah, well, I'm actually pretty familiar with Grafton. My mom is from Lankin, North Dakota, so I spent a lot of time in Walsh County in my life. And what's that?
Go Aggies.
Go Aggies. We get up there a lot over the years. I still have some relatives up there, and so pretty familiar with it. But Grafton's a pretty peaceful place. That's a nice community, nice business community, nice agriculture community. Got schools, and it's a setting where you go to that street corner, and there are a lot of homes in harm's way. The allegations in this case make pretty clear that there were a lot of citizens out there. The law enforcement center was close by, but I know in talking with all of these folks, you're concerned about the citizens out there that are asleep that night when this gunfire breaks out. Unprecedented, by the way. As we pointed out, there's never been in the history of Grafton, according to Chief Dumas, there's never been an exchange of fire. And that erupted that night, and you can imagine the impact on the neighborhoods there in that setting in Grafton, North Dakota. So yeah, my point was that he elevated that night. You asked, the allegations out of South Dakota already existed. He was an alleged drug dealer, and our indictment alleges drug dealing activity, drug dealing conspiracy. But that night he elevated his game. He went beyond being a drug dealer. We deal with drug dealers all the time in federal court. We go through, we talk with them, we go through all the information, and we get to a point where inevitably you get to a point where they try to either cooperate with you, and they give you other drug dealers, and it goes on and on. He elevated his state of play. He moved himself beyond being a conspirator, beyond being a drug dealer, a drug dealing conspirator. He moved himself, we allege, to being an attempted cop killer. He moved his state of play well above that. This case is not and will not proceed on this case as we do our other drug cases. It's not just another drug case. The men and women in uniform. We've had a long 3 months in this state when it comes to the men and women in uniform. Federal, state, local. We've had riots in downtown Fargo where men and women in uniform were pelted with bottles, with rocks, insults hurled, anything that could be picked up on the street. We had Officer Holte murdered in the line of duty. Deputy Nord injured in the line of duty. And now this. That's why we talk about this as an escalation by this defendant, we allege, of his prior conduct that had already been ferreted out in South Dakota with an allegation down there and an indictment. And then the conduct here. I want to commend, there have been a number of federal law enforcement entities working very closely with the people here on the steps. They're doing a great job. You've got a great task force up here in the Greater Grand Forks area. They do tremendous work. And, approaching this thing from every possible avenue. I don't want to leave anybody out, but we mentioned that, been in touch with and working with BCI, HSI, ATF, others involved, and then obviously the Sheriff's Department up there in Walsh County, the Police Department in Grafton. And I can't compliment the State's Attorney enough. I mean, those working relationships are important. between the federal and the state governments and counties. They're important because there's a lot that we can't begin to accomplish without those cohesive efforts. And so from the very beginning, I think we've had an agreement about what the right sequence would be, and we've affirmed that every step of the way, and here we are today.
And you mentioned you spoke with Lucas yesterday. I guess
I did.
That should have been one of the first questions. How's he feeling? How's he doing?
Well, I'm not going to get too far into that. I'll say this. He obviously showed tremendous bravery that night. I mean, every time someone puts on the uniform and goes out the door, but I would describe his spirits as very high. Just as the chief told me last week when we were talking about his reaction, really miraculous, I would say at this point, miraculous recovery. When you think about the fact where the bullet entered, where it exited the body, what his injuries wound up being. I dare say he should be feeling like a very blessed man. But we had a very nice conversation yesterday. He's a very impressive young professional. I read somewhere he was characterized as the future of Grafton, the Grafton Police Department. And I know we're all pleased that he's going to have that opportunity, having lived through this incident.
You mentioned he was shot twice. Can you elaborate? We
No.
knew once in the chest.
No, not going to elaborate on that.
Will the charges be increased due to the nature of due to the multiple shots striking off?
No, I mean, those are facts that would be relevant if we ever get to the point of sentencing this case. If we get up to that, if there's a conviction, that'll be relevant. But, this case has been elevated. It's elevated not because it's in federal court. It's elevated by what we allege to be his violent conduct in relation to his already serious drug trafficking allegations. And I keep stressing that because, we take seriously the fact that these are just allegations. At this point, they're words on paper alleging a crime. The grand jury has been presented with evidence and has returned an indictment saying, we think that this deserves to go forward. But we haven't proven our case. We intend to, and we look forward to the opportunity to prove this matter.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Is there anything else?
I don't know if Chief Dumas or Sheriff want to just mention how the departments are holding up at all, given this going forward.
Come on down. You might want to come on down if you're going to address that.
I mean, if you don't want to, that's fine. I just wanted to at least give you the opportunity.
We're just working through everything we can,
Could you come back for? Sorry.
Sorry, you guys. Let me get out of your way there.
we're working through the officer-involved shooting and the incident, being down 2 officers with the investigation that's going on, and we've had generous offers from Williston Police Department came and covered some shifts. The Walsh County Sheriff's Office has offered to cover, so I mean it's a collaborative effort to keep us moving forward. But we're moving forward. So.
How are the officers holding up, mentally, given,
I can't comment on any of the internal aspects of it, just because it's still ongoing. So.
How big is your department?
We have 9 sworn and an admin assistant, so 10 full-time staff.
So really, you're down a quarter of your department.
Correct.
So that's been huge having the Walsh County and Williston come out.
Very big, yeah, very big thanks, and our community and our department's very thankful for that. So.
You got your way here.
Yep, I can't comment on anything to do with any of the internal investigation or the BCI investigation that's ongoing. So.
Are they giving you a timeline how long that may take or anything?
No. Ron, you
Great.
listening to that?
Good. Well, we thank all you for the